You're listening to the Baumbastic Podcast with Andrew Ellis on Inside Arkansas.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Baumbastic Podcast. I am Andrew Ellis here with Inside Arkansas. It is a not beautiful Tuesday, February 18th. It is currently snowing like crazy here in Northwest Arkansas, so hope everybody is staying safe. Hope everybody's got their bread and milk and they're ready to kick it at the crib for a few days here. I know I'm definitely going to enjoy this time in. I'm a homebody anyway. But again, hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's staying safe wherever you're at. I know a lot of people may not be getting the snow, and so maybe you're the lucky ones. Who knows? But there's a lot to get into, man, with this Arkansas Razorback baseball team coming off of their 4-game sweep of the Washington State Cougars. A productive 4-0 start to the weekend, or start to the season this past weekend. Arkansas outscores Washington State 34-8. If you missed all of our breakdowns of kind of the weekend that was, we did a live watch along on Friday for the doubleheader. So I was live for 6.5 hours. If you're not saying you should go sift through that, it was kind of a live reaction type of thing. And so there was a lot that we did there. I did a post-game report for Saturday's game and for Monday's game. So if you missed those, go check those out if you were not able to catch the games on streaming on SEC Network Plus on the ESPN app over the weekend, or if you are not familiar with Stu Hog's YouTube, because he crushes it. That's a good way. If you want to just if you missed the game and want to get caught up, obviously listen to the Baumbastic Podcast. Let me break it down for you. But if you want to see the stuff for yourself, usually about an hour after the game or so, Stu Hog will have the games up for like a little highlight recap. Those are always very fun to watch. And by the way, if you're not able to make it to Arlington this weekend, which I know, again, the weather is a little crazy, so I don't know if anybody's going anywhere for a while. We'll see. DVH tell the team if they're going to have to shovel their way out, they're going to get down to Arlington to play some baseball. But if you're not able to make it down there or not able to purchase Flow Sports, you don't want to deal with that whole shindig, I will definitely be bringing as much coverage as I can. I look forward to being down there. I'm taking the lady with me. Me and Hillary will be celebrating our 3-year anniversary, which is always cool. And we're going to be doing it in Arlington. What a more romantic way after Valentine's Day to treat your lady than to make her come to work with you and watch a bunch of baseball in a big league park. I can think of worse things, honestly. But again, I will have as much coverage as possible. Definitely will have post-game recaps. We'll try to do like a little mini preview for each game to kind of talk about who Arkansas is facing on the mound, their opponents. And those are going to be some big-time games there in Arlington. Arkansas gets to play a top 25 team in TCU, a team in Michigan that went 4-0 over the weekend and beat a top 5 team in Virginia. Looked awesome. They're definitely looking like a much more improved roster than we maybe thought. And then, of course, you get to face the team that won your regional last year in Kansas State. So that's all going to be fine and dandy. So be sure you're subscribed to the Inside Arkansas YouTube channel, because I know not everybody is. Make sure you're subscribed there so you don't miss it. Hit that little notification, that little bell there whenever you subscribe. That way it'll alert you when we post videos, because I feel like sometimes these videos are like time sensitive, especially those post-game recaps, those post-game or those pre-game previews. So make sure you know when we're publishing videos, and make sure, of course, you're subscribed on wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever. But again, I said we had a lot to get into on today's show, and we do. Actually, I got to be honest with you guys. This might be the most nervous I've ever been for a Baumbastic. Not nervous. I mean, I love talking ball. It's not like a high pressure job necessarily, but there's a lot to get into with this lineup. What we're going to try to do is just go through each spot in the lineup and maybe reassess where we're at and just talk through it all. But I want to make sure that I give this the respect it deserves. And it's always tough when you're talking about individuals, especially like players. Like I hate coming on here and having to point out when a guy is struggling or, anything like that, or, hey, I actually don't think this guy's a starter, stuff like that. It's always a little bit tough. And everyone also has their own opinion about it. Now that everyone, because a lot of times in the off season, a lot of you guys get out to Baum and watch the games, and you're reading everything you can. You're staying as informed as possible. But a lot of times you're kind of like depending on whether it's me or other writers or whatever, or just kind of DVH himself to tell you what's going on. It's different when you can see the games yourself. You can watch on TV, or you can go to Baum and you see it. Now you have your opinion. And so a lot of times you have a little bit more of a hostile crowd, if you will. So I kind of know that no matter what I say in this episode, it's going to ruffle some feathers, but that's good. That's because you guys care. And ultimately that's cool to me in and of its own right. The fact that we're even able to have arguments in February about baseball really makes me happy. But again, like I said, everyone kind of has their opinion. And look, who's to say whose opinions are right? Ultimately, none of our opinions really matter. It's just kind of a matter of what DVH and the coaching staff choose to go with, and ultimately what happens on the field. And again, these things are always subject to change. And so I don't think any of us should be feeling like we have a firm grasp on who goes where. This guy sucks. He shouldn't play. This guy's awesome. He needs to play every day. It's all a little bit up in the air. Of course, there's some kuhio less so than others, like Kuhio Aloy, spoiler alert. We think we're safe at shortstop. I think he's a starting shortstop. I think Bernardo's probably going to start at third base, in case you were worried about that. But again, we're going to talk about every position. But before we do that, I do just want to address, I guess, the elephant in the room. Man, a lot of people have been dunking on me this weekend about the Nolan Souza situation. Like, I've had several people tweet at me or, tag me in certain things or comment and, kind of be like, hey, like, most of it's in jest. Most people are just kind of poking fun because they know I'm a huge Nolan Souza guy. But there was a couple that, like, you could tell was a little bit of like a putting the finger in your chest and you told me Nolan Souza was good and he's 1 for 7 and he struck out 3 times on Saturday. Like, what the hell, man? I sensed a little like it definitely, the people were not happy about the way that Nolan Souza played this past weekend, which, look, I mean, he goes 1 for 7 on the weekend. That's a 143 average for those counting at home. He had a lot of strikeouts. Definitely had a really rough day on Saturday. Going 1 for 4 in the opener with a 114 mile an hour single. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to freak out too much on that, but people were definitely pissed after Saturday, about Nolan Souza and his situation at second base, which, like, I understand, you want these guys to play well, but there were a lot of people dunking on me about that. And I was surprised, but it also reminds me a lot of when people were dunking on me this time last year about Kuhio Aloy, and when people were dunking on me a couple years ago about Caleb Cali. That was the big one, because I had a ton of tweets about Caleb Cali being like, this guy's going to be the awesomest transfer ever. He's going to be the best JUCO player in the country. He's going to be one of the surprises in college baseball. And then he starts off like 2 for 26 or something stupid like that. So everybody was old takes exposing me and telling me, hey, man, you may want to rethink this whole Caleb Cali thing. I was looking at his swing. I'm starting to see some stuff that I don't like. And it's like, okay, yeah, I can also watch someone go 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts and say, not good. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But a lot of times what's frustrating about it is you ultimately just have to let these things play out. And all of these guys in this Razorback lineup, even some of the guys we feel very confident about, like an Aloy, like an Iredale, even like a Ryder Helfrich, are just kind of boomer bust by nature. And so a lot of times, like Kuhio Aloy, you guys have been watching Kuhio Aloy for a couple years now. There's days you go to the park and you're like, this guy can't hit his way out of a wet paper sack. Like, this guy is just lost at the plate. And then the second game of the doubleheader are happening, and you're like, oh, actually, no, he's good again. That's the guy who's projected to be a first round pick. Makes sense. You see him hit a ball 415 oppo. And that's just, again, I'm not saying I love it. It's just kind of part of the experience with some of these guys. But I think the thing that frustrates me, and most of you guys, like, I feel like the people who listen to this show, not saying that like, people that listen to Baumbastic are cooler than anyone else. Obviously, I'm biased. I like you guys. But I feel like if you watch this show and you're like listening to the episodes leading up to the season and you're, trying to stay tapped in, you're trying to be as informed as possible on Arkansas baseball, which, one, I appreciate you for doing that. But I feel like a lot of you guys at least like had some semblance. It's not like you went into this season blind and this is your first time ever even finding out who Charles Davalon is or Rocco Pepe or any of these guys. And so I feel like some of you at least had some level of a baseline expectation or understanding of some of these pieces and what they bring to the table. But what makes it difficult is when you have 4 games throughout a season, which in a 60 plus game season, that's a very, very small fraction of a percentage of the overall games, but it's the only sample size we have to go off of. And so it's just kind of tough not to overreact and say, well, this guy's not hitting well, so he's out of the lineup. This guy's hitting well, he's in there every day. And as it stands today, I mentioned Nolan Souza and Rocco Pepe, and even Kendall Diggs I'll throw in here because he's also 1 for 7. But Souza and Pepe are a combined 2 for 18, 1 for 11 on the Rocco Pepe side with a couple of strikeouts. And so it's like, it's hard to look at these guys and say, yeah, for sure, just throw them in the lineup every day. You're based on this, and this is your first time seeing some of these guys. it can be a little bit like, wait, why is this guy batting fifth? Why is this guy batting third? Why did Rocco Pepe get 4 starts? Because I had someone really tweeted me and asked him, I think it was Ryan McDaniel, who's a legend on the show, always commenting. He's like, why did they start Rocco Pepe 4 games? Dude's 1 for 11. Like what the hell? And again, so it's kind of just like a reminder to me that like all these guys have to earn it every day, which is what's tough about it. But also it's like, people don't really care what you did last year. They don't really care what you did over the offseason. They don't really care what you did in scrimmages leading up to the season. Once the season started, it's like a fresh slate, and you better be producing immediately, or this fan base is going to sour on you pretty quickly. But to answer his question, and really, I'm sure the question a lot of you guys are asking, Rocco Pepe had done a lot to earn that spot to be in that position. Now, first base may not end up being the spot for Rocco Pepe, and we'll talk about what Arkansas is going to do defensively, because that's another huge question that people have been asking. What the hell are they going to do at first base? And we'll get to that for sure. I'm trying not to be too long-winded here, but I'm already running into trouble. Whether it's first base, right field, left field, or DH, Arkansas is probably going to need Rocco Pepe's bat in the lineup. Of course, they're going to need him to hit better than 111, but we're talking about a guy who hit 327 last season with 14 home runs at Fresno State, not in the SEC, a little bit different, but a guy who's a 300 hitter for his career, has a ton of experience under his belt. And again, I know I'm referencing these scrimmages leading up to the season a lot, but in the scrimmages leading up to the season, he was leading the team in OPS. He was hitting 320 with 3 home runs, which is tied for Brent Iredale for the lead on the team, led the team with 8 runs scored, had a sac fly, drew some walks, hit by pitch, stole a base even, and it only struck out once. So it's like, going into the season, there was not really a case to be made that Rocco Pepe shouldn't be in the lineup. So again, I understand he goes 1 for 11. Obviously, that's not good. He's got to do better. But like you guys have been listening to the show, you've been listening to a lot of these episodes, a lot of lineup projection, a lot of who's going to be good. Have you ever at one point heard me question whether or not Rocco Pepe should be in the lineup? No. And that's not to say that I'm a genius and you should always listen to what I say and I'm always right. But I'm just going off of what has been out there, the career he has, the resume he has, and again, what he's done in practices and scrimmages. Hell, the coaching staff put him number 3 in the lineup. They don't put bums in that spot, and I think he may have hit 5th opening day or something like that. But he's hitting in the middle of the order, and they expected him to kind of be the starter at first base. Like, they didn't just do that on a whim. Like, he had kind of earned the right to be in that spot. And I would say the same applies to Nolan Souza. Again, I see there's a lot of people who, see 7 at-bats worth of experience. Like, man, this Nolan Souza guy clearly just hasn't gotten any better since his freshman year. I mean, strikes out all the time. Like, just can't hit a breaking ball. All the, like, you hear all the same terminology when a guy's struggling. Oh, he's trying to do too much. Oh, he's pulling off. Oh, you can't hit the breaking ball, or like all these weird things. And they're like, man, wait, so why is Nolan Souza in the lineup? Which, by the way, Nolan Souza was only in the lineup twice, so it's not even like it was like that crazy. But to answer the question, though, I mean, Nolan Souza was an SEC all freshman guy, ended up not being in the lineup towards the end of the year, but like showed a ton of flashes as a freshman and was a big time recruit. So it's like, guys like that, you usually are kind of expecting there's some assumed progression there. But going back to offseason scrimmages, so in the fall, Souza hit just under 300, had a couple home runs, led the team in stolen bases, led the team in runs scored. Actually, that's a lie. He was second to Brent Iredale on the team in runs scored, led the team with 9 walks, which I think is an important part of the equation for Nolan Souza. You know what he also did? He had 10 strikeouts, which did not lead the team. There were a couple guys with more than that. But Souza in the fall hit really well, did a lot of damage, showed a lot of athleticism, showed a little bit more of an advanced overall feel at the plate, was hitting some base hits to left field, hit good 2-strike approach, drew a ton of walks, also swings and misses a good bit still, kind of like Kuhio Aloy, and hell, even like Brent Iredale. Like, swings and misses are just going to be kind of part of the equation, but there's a lot of good mixed in with that equation. So coming out of his freshman year, we expected, hey, this guy's got a chance to be pretty good. He has a pretty good summer out in the California League, comes into the fall, immediately plays really well. And by the end of the fall, they played an exhibition series against Oklahoma State. He was the starting second baseman. He hit 5th in the lineup. He goes 3 for 8 in that series with a couple doubles. So 5 total bases, drove in a couple runs, scored a couple runs, only struck out once. So again, I'm making sure we're all on the same page with this story and how it's played out. Solid freshman year, solid summer, really good fall. plays well against Oklahoma State in the exhibition series. So again, going into the spring, there was no real argument to be made that Nolan Souza would not be in the everyday lineup. You guys all heard me and all these other people talking about him as a breakout guy. Then we go to these scrimmages leading up to the season. And once again, Nolan Souza hits 400. He's 10 of 25. He's got 1 home run, 1 triple, 1 double. So that would be a 640 slugging percentage, an OPS over 1.1. He also led the team with 6 stolen bases, draws 5 or 6 more walks, has a sac fly, also had some strikeouts, had 7 strikeouts as well in 25 at-bats. So, again, you kind of see the vision of what Nolan Souza brings to the table. And we saw a little bit of all of that throughout the offseason, but it was a lot of good. And so, again, leading into the season, there was no controversy. I've done all these lineup projections. I've done all these episodes leading up to the season. Never once did y'all hear me say, well, first we got to figure out, is Nolan Souza going to be in the everyday lineup? For me, that was never a question. Clearly for the coaching staff, after watching him strike out 3 times on Saturday, they hit the panic button a little bit and yanked him on out of there. And he didn't hit against the 2 lefties. We'll see if that continues. Of course, Cam Kosal's ascent and his recent surge, which, by the way, that's another part of the story, is that Kosal was really struggling in the fall. In the spring, Kosal was crushing. Leading up to the season, Cam Kosal was hitting a crisp 435, 10 of 23. And so Kosal really came on strong here and forced this conversation, which is a big part of the equation. And I think a lot of times people are, when it comes to Souza, are focusing in on the Souza versus Kosal aspect of this. But, we're about to get into the full lineup breakdown here. I've never been a big believer that it needs to be one or the other. I think there's a very good chance both of those guys are in Arkansas's top 9 most effective bats. So I think there's a lot of ways you can get both those guys involved. And we've talked about some of them. Like going back to the fall, there was always the question of, will one of those guys move to first base? Because it kind of just makes sense. Or maybe one of them DH. And both those things are still very much in play. But ultimately, I think coming into the offseason, we all kind of expected Nolan Souza and Rocco Pepe both to be in the everyday lineup and to be guys that really needed to perform well for this Arkansas offense to take that next step. And so if a lot of people have been kind of asking, well, why are they still in the lineup? They suck. Well, it's because you kind of need them to play well. You know what I mean? It's same why Arkansas basketball keeps sticking with Nelly Davis, who, you kind of need him to play well if you're going to achieve. Now, this baseball lineup obviously has a lot more options than the Razorback basketball lineup. But speaking of options, let's go ahead and get into it now. We're just going to pull up the chart here. This beautiful, nice clipboard chart that we cooked up here. Okay, catcher, I think we all agree. Ryder Helfer, actually, I don't think we all agree, because I know a lot of people, again, do the opening weekend overreaction thing, and they're like, well, Ryder Helfer sucks, and Zane Becker's awesome. Why don't we just start Zane Becker every day? I think Zane Becker is going to get a ton of starts. I love Zane Becker. Matter of fact, I coined myself on yesterday's episode the inventor of the Zane Becker fan club. So no, you don't need to sell me on Zane Becker, but I think Ryder Helfer, who, by the way, didn't have as bad of a weekend as some people seem to think. He goes 3 for 8 at the plate, not a big sample size, but that's a 375 batting average. He also drew 5 walks, which was second on the team. And he also hit a triple, also hit a double. He's going to be a guy that is going to be a double-digit home run candidate. And so I think if he's working walks at a pretty good rate, getting on base at a pretty good rate, hitting 375, the power is going to come. And so I really I'm inclined to be pretty pleased with what Ryder Helfer did overall this past weekend. He had 3 strikeouts. You'd probably like him to make a little bit more contact. He also got thrown out on the base paths, but he threw out a couple guys on the base paths. I thought he did a really good job of controlling the run game for the most part. The times that bases were stolen on him, I thought it was more on the pitcher, one of which in particular, I was definitely on the pitcher. He did make a bad throwing error in game 1, which damn near cost Arkansas the game. But overall, I think I'm a good bit away from starting any controversy on over who should be Arkansas's everyday catcher. And like I've told you guys 1,000 times now, they're both going to get a fair share of starts. And so I think we're all good there. I'm going to skip first base because I think that's the controversial one that we'll need to really dive into. Second base, of course, I talked about Nolan Souza a lot. Cam Kosal is the other option there. I think there's plenty of worlds where both of those guys are in the lineup, and that probably at this point needs to be the case. Third base, Brent Iredale, again, I don't think there's much controversy there. I threw Reese Robinette, who, of course, is the backup there. He's also potentially maybe in that first base battle. We'll touch on that in a second. Shortstop, we're all good. Kuhio Aloy, Gabe Frazier's the freshman behind him, grooming him. Okay, you're all good. Again, left field, Justin Thomas, who started all 4 games in left field, until further notice, I don't think there's much controversy there. He also swung the bat really well, took a ton of walks, drew 7 walks, stole a couple bases. Justin Thomas, until he stops playing really good baseball, I don't really think there's much to talk about there. And Charles Davalon had a pretty solid weekend at the dish. Nothing crazy, but I feel like again, you guys got a little bit of a glimpse of what he's all about. Maybe a little shaky in the field defensively, especially Saturday. But outside of that one inning, which was a bad inning, make no mistake about it, really haven't seen much to be concerned about when it comes to Charles Davalon. Which, by the way, I know I'm doing the thing again where I'm reading stuff, or I'm kind of just zipping through it as if everyone's watching on YouTube. For those that are listening on your podcast there, at catcher, I've got Ryder Helberg and Zane Becker. Those are the only 2 options. Second base, Nolan Souza and Kosal, really the only 2 options. Brent Iredale, Reese Robinette at third, Kuhio Aloy, Gabe Frazier at short. And at left field here, I have Justin Thomas as a no-doubt starter, but of course, Logan Maxwell, Rocco Pepe, very much in the mix there, and guys that I think you'll probably see, whether it's midweeks or whatever, get a start or 2 there. Center field, Brenton Clark. I was a little surprised we didn't see the freshman Brenton Clark this weekend. He had a really productive fall, cooled off a good bit in the spring, but still a guy that I think has a nice, bright future, a guy that can help Arkansas. And I would say he's probably the overall backup at that spot, although realistically, Justin Thomas would probably just move on over if something did happen to Davalon. And if his defense continues to be a question mark, maybe you do see that move. So those are the guys there in center field. Right field, again, is kind of cahoots with first base, where it's a little bit of an open-ended spot there. Kendall Diggs, again, only played 2 games this weekend, went 1 for 7 in those games. Again, I have no reason to believe that he shouldn't be in the everyday lineup. I feel like, his career track record is, especially with what he did as a sophomore, helps. He was swinging the bat really well in the scrimmages leading up to this. I'm looking at the numbers here. He was 10 of 26, which is a 385 average, had a couple home runs, had a double, drew a decent amount of walks, struck out a good bit, but was swinging the bat well leading up to the season. So I have no reason to believe he won't swing the bat well, during the season, despite a slow 1 for 7 start. He did have a nice opposite field double. We also saw Rocco Pepe get a start out there in right field, did just completely misplay a fly ball, which led to Aiden Jimenez giving up a quote unquote earned run because they couldn't slap him with an error. But Rocco Pepe is a guy that's played a lot, maybe more of an option in left field, but I think he's still kind of in that right field battle. Logan Maxwell, of course, also an option there in right field as well. And Kuhio Aloy, who hasn't played a ton defensively in the field. In the fall, we all thought, hey, this guy's going to have a chance to be the starting first baseman, and perhaps he'll end up rejoining that competition. But between fall and spring, during that Christmas break, the coaching staff kind of made a decision. Kuhio Aloy at first base, probably not working out. So let's maybe move him to outfield. We feel like that's where his future will be professionally. Plus, one of the things about Kuhio Aloy, he's got a really, really strong arm. I mean, this is a guy that came into college as a pitcher, and he's made a couple throws in some scrimmages where I'm like, holy cow, I kind of forget that you've got a really plus throwing arm. So I feel like right field really makes sense for him long term. I think he's going to be kind of like they did with Kendall Diggs as a sophomore, where they started to mix him in a little bit. And you saw there were some growing pains. He needed to learn how to play out there. But I think Kuhio Aloy, this time next year, hopefully they're able to keep him around. I mean, his brother's likely getting drafted. He's not draft eligible till next year. I think this time next year, if all goes well, you're looking at Kuhio Aloy starting and being your everyday right fielder and giving you plus power. I mean, he's got 2 home runs already. The way he swung the bat really helped himself this weekend. And by the way, I've referenced those spring scrimmages a lot. Leading up to the season, in the spring scrimmages, Kuhio Aloy was 3 for 20 with 9 strikeouts. So if you want to know, if you see him hit the home run on Friday and hit the home run on Monday, and you're like, man, why wasn't this guy in the lineup every day? Well, it's because, again, other guys had been doing more leading up to it. He did have a very impressive fall. And so I'm very intrigued by the bat of Kuhio Aloy. I think he's a huge X factor for this team and really gives them some of that boost that they might need. Will he end up being a DH? Obviously, on this chart here, I'll pull it up again. I don't have DH because really you're just going to take whoever's the best available guy once you set your 9 in the field. That's pretty much how that will work. But let's talk about this first base thing. So you see here, I still have Rocco Pepe listed there. He got 3 starts at first base. Let's see. What did they charge him with? Did they charge him with? Let's see. They charged him with 1 error, which I believe came in the 10th inning of that Friday game, that first game Friday. But there were a couple other little shaky plays here and there. The error that Ryder Helfrich made, I feel like a taller first baseman almost certainly makes that, catch. It was just kind of right above his head. Not the tallest guy in the world, Rocco Pepe. And there was another weird play where a ball was hit to his right and he went to go get it. And it's like, no, you have to cover the bag. And he had to run back and then kind of barely got back in time. So you can see there's still some kinks to be worked out there defensively. I've spoken about this a couple times now, but leading up to the season in scrimmages, because if you remember, in a press conference right at the beginning of fall practice, Dave just casually threw it in there. He's like, we're going to try Rocco Pepe out at first base. And we were all like, what? We were all like, wait, we didn't know about this. Okay, cool. We'll see how this goes. And then in the spring, in the practices leading up to the season, there really wasn't much hit his way. Like, it was actually kind of hilarious how many different times he became directly involved with a play and really needed to make one. Obviously, they hit a ground ball to Vajiva's shortstop. He makes a good, clean throw. Rocco Pepe's there to catch it, but you or I can do that. We're wondering, hey, if a ball's hit right at him, what can he do? Can he pick a ball that's scooped in the dirt? Can he go up and get a ball? Can he move side to side? All these things. We really didn't get to see much of a test for that with Rocco Pepe. So, and you can go back and listen to all of my my shows that I did leading up to it. It wasn't a huge talking point, and I was like, I guess they're just going to roll with Pepe at first base because offensively they want his bat. But it wasn't really set in stone. We just kind of assumed that's what they would do. And of course they did it. I wonder now if they're going to maybe rethink that a little bit. The ultimate fallback option is Michael Anderson, the Rhode Island transfer who has 23 home runs in his career. You want to talk about boom or bust at the plate? Michael Anderson is very boom or bust at the plate. I'll bet any amount of money you want to bet that he's going to have at least 2 games this year where he hits this mammoth home run. And we all as a collective fan base are going to be like, wow, maybe that guy should be in the lineup every day. It's going to happen, whether it's a midweek game or a spot start. He's going to have some moments like that. He also just fits the archetype of what you expect from a first baseman. 6'4", 6'5", 220, 230, ton of power. He's also the best defender Arkansas has over there. Although I think he also might have made an error in this game. Or I don't know if they charged him with an error. I think it was in that Jimenez inning where they didn't charge him with an error, but I probably would have maybe thought about it. It kind of ricocheted off of him and they gave the guy a base hit. I might have given an error, but again, I do think Anderson, between all these guys that we're talking about, has the most experience playing first base and is the best overall defender, can scoop, can make plays that are hit, throw high throws. He can bail you out there. So he's kind of the ultimate fallback where if DVH is just F it, I'm tired of watching guys kick balls around at first base. Let's just go defense. I think that guy would be Michael Anderson, and you would just basically have to live with him hitting 220 with the occasional 470-foot home run, which honestly, there are much worse options to have there. So going back to this, I threw Kendall Diggs and put a little question mark because we haven't seen him there yet, but he played a little bit of first base in the spring leading up to the season. And he came to Arkansas as an infielder, so it kind of just makes sense on paper. He spent a lot of time at first base a couple years ago when they thought that might be where he would end up starting. So maybe he ends up getting a shot there. I wouldn't be stunned to see that here in the next few weeks. But ultimately, I think Kuhio Souza is kind of the X factor that we haven't seen yet. Neither of those guys have, at least to my knowledge, taken ground balls at first base, definitely have not played first base in a scrimmage. So we'll see. Both those guys are what I would consider to be an average to above average defenders at second base. So you would reasonably assume they would be all right at first base. But again, it's just a matter of learning the position, learning the ins and outs of the footwork, and don't go get the ball that's hit to your right, all that kind of stuff. So we'll see if they go that route. But ultimately, when you're trying to get your 9 best bats in the lineup, I don't know how you can do that without at least exploring that option. I'm not saying that needs to definitively be what Arkansas does every day, but I think it definitely needs to be on their radar. And a guy like Nolan Souza also, by the way, kind of looks like a first baseman. I've seen a lot of people saying, hey, Arkansas needs a tall first baseman. Nolan Souza's 6'2", 6'3". He would kind of fit that criteria. I also think Kosal would be kind of in the Trevor Ezell mode of a converted second baseman that doesn't look the part of a first baseman. Kosal, I think, is an okay defender at second base. If you move him to first base, I would consider him an above average defender. I haven't seen him take one single rep there. I'm just saying, athletically and skill set wise, you would assume he would be at least pretty good. And who knows, by the way, I mentioned Kuhio Aloy and how much I kind of like the idea of him in right field. He may very well mix his way right back into this first base battle here. The only other guy you can really make a case for is Reese Robinette, who, of course, by the way, played first base this weekend, made a nice defensive play over there. And then maybe, made an interesting defensive play where he had to kind of body one up. He also got a couple at-bats. I really like Big Country, Reese Robinette. Although, actually, I lied. He's not Big Country anymore. We've demoted him from that. We'll see. Is he going to play there every day necessarily? I don't know. But I do think, and I talked about this a lot when I did a lineup projection pod, right? I threw out 4 hypothetical lineups. I'm going to pull this up again. There's a lot of names listed on this page. And, of course, not all of them are necessarily serious threats to play every day. But as you're just looking at it, you can really come up with some options. Like, let's say Arkansas is facing a team that has a right-handed starting pitcher that really struggles against lefties. You could put a right-handed pitcher that struggles against left-handed batters. You could put Logan Maxwell in left field, Kendall Diggs in right field, Charles Davalon, left-handed swinger, in center field. You could have Kosal or Souza at DH. You could have Reese Robinette at first base. You could have Kosal or Souza at second base. You could even do something weird if you really wanted to get crazy. Who knows? A catcher, you don't have a left-handed hitter and catcher. But like, you kind of see the vision where like you could do something like that if you really wanted to. If you wanted to just go a straight up defense first lineup, maybe it would look something like Helfrich, Anderson, Souza, Thomas in left, Davalon in center, and then maybe Logan Maxwell in right. I guess Kendall Diggs is probably the best defender you have in right. But there's like different options you can go about. And then again, I think DH is kind of going to be the spot where every bit of experimenting you want to do affects DH in an indirect way, because, if you're going to have Nolan Souza start at second, well, then Cam Kosal immediately becomes an option at at DH. If you're going to have Michael Anderson start at first base, well, then Rocco Pepe immediately becomes an option at DH. If you have Kendall Diggs in right field, then Maxwell and Pepe become options at DH. Another aspect of this, there's 2 aspects that I feel like we haven't really talked about a ton. Logan Maxwell is very much banged up. That's kind of not a secret at this point. He was banged up in the scrimmages leading up to the season, wasn't running the bases, then ends up getting a couple starts opening weekend, and it was a similar kind of thing. Like, I think you could kind of tell he wasn't fully 100% healthy. And then on Saturday, he hits a base hit down the line in left field and tweaks his hammy and ends up turning, a double into a single essentially and asking for a pinch runner out. I don't believe we've seen him play since then. So it's very possible that Logan Maxwell might, maybe they're going to rest him this weekend, which honestly might be the move, because then it just allows you to experiment a little bit more. You can maybe throw Kuhio in right field. You can maybe throw whoever out in the open and kind of mix and match. It just gives you one less mouth to feed, so to speak. So that's a little bit of an X factor there, where if you remove him from these outfield / DH conversations, it kind of creates more opportunity for some of these guys, whether that's Kosal, whether that's Kuhio Aloy. Really, if I'm Logan Maxwell, I'm looking at Kuhio Aloy and I'm panicking, where I'm like, holy cow, if this dude gets 3 starts at DH this weekend in a big league ballpark, he really might put on a show and lock that one up. He's got 2 home runs already. Like, he's got that kind of upside that I think some of these guys that we're talking about just frankly can't compete with. Like, I think Cam Kosal and Logan Maxwell are both, guys that can hit around 300, guys that can get on base, scrappy, good baseball players. Kuhio Aloy has a ceiling that those guys just simply cannot reach. Obviously, I don't know if Kuhio Aloy is going to reach his ultimate ceiling and end up being a 15 to 20 home run guy, but like, that's the kind of power you're talking about. And I think the same kind of applies to Nolan Souza. But ultimately, both of those guys that I just mentioned are huge strikeout guys as well. And so it's kind of one of those things you just kind of have to assess where all these things are at. And so, but ultimately, if I were to offer a little bit of criticism to my boy DVH, and I love Dave Van Horn. I'm actually not criticizing Dave Van Horn. I'm just kind of talking about this Razorback team and some of the trends that are going, and maybe perhaps red flags that are popping up. So one, I think dating back to the fall, I mean, you guys have been listening to me, this offseason, we kind of always knew first base was going to be the position where you could experiment, where there was going to be a question mark, where we didn't really know. That's why they've had 7 different guys play over there. We knew they brought in a ton of outfielders, and this is back when we thought Rocco Pepe was an outfielder. We knew about the middle infield. We knew about Iredale. We knew at catcher. First base was kind of always, if you even go back to August, September, was the position that we didn't really know about, to the point where we thought, hey, maybe you just move. Initially, we all kind of thought move Kosal or Souza over there. That kind of solves that problem, get you both in the lineup. They opted not to go that route, which I'm not, not necessarily saying they're right or wrong for that, but it's something to consider because first base still hasn't been solved. We still are no closer on February 18th to finding an answer to the question at first base than we were in literally August when we had 4, 5, 6 options. I mean, I just showed a graphic that had 5 different options on it. Again, I think that's a little bit of a red flag. Like how have they not been able to find any sort of clarity there? And maybe they have. Maybe they've just decided, hey, Rocco Pepe's going to hit. He's going to hit 300 with 10 home runs. We're just going to live with it. He's going to be all right at first base. It's not going to be great, but hopefully it doesn't kill us. We'll just live with that. If they opt to do that, like I'm not really going to throw too much of a fit. Ultimately, I'm a offense over defense guy. Screw the defense. I don't care about that. I just want you to hit nukes. That's really all I care about. And so I could get behind it, but I just hope that we have some sort of clarity. And so I'm interested to see this weekend if new names get thrown over there, if they do the Kosal Souza experiment over there at first base, if maybe Big Country gets a start, if maybe you give Michael Anderson more of a look. I know he got one start this past weekend. If Diggs makes his way over there, I'll be very interested to see if we get any closer to feeling okay about the position. And another thing that I think is a little concerning, you guys have heard me say a lot throughout this offseason, the best version of this Arkansas lineup, the best case scenario for this Razorback baseball team to reach their ultimate ceiling, it's going to need its sophomore class to be really good. And obviously Gabe Gackle counts in that sophomore class. Ryder Helfrich counts in that sophomore class. And I feel like Nolan Souza counts in that sophomore class. You could even actually throw in Cam Kosal. So if you're kind of going off of that, and again, I think Souza and Helfrich and, of course, Gackle are like 3 of the highest caliber athletes on the team and the guys who had the highest ceiling that might be like future top 3 round picks. And really, if there's one thing this Razorback lineup cannot afford with the way that the Jason Jones situation played out, with the way that the Mason Neville situation played out, with the way the Drake Vernado situation played out, they cannot afford to have another blue chip position player not hit. And when I say hit, I mean literally hit, but also I mean like be a productive piece. You cannot have another top recruit position player that you're kind of counting on to be a guy for you just not produce. So I think if you're the coaching staff and you're going into this season knowing we got to get Helfrich going, we got to get Souza going, you bench Nolan Souza after the first game of the season. And again, they had a lefty starter. Perhaps they really do just plan to platoon him all year and hide him against lefties. Maybe that's their goal. Although I would point out that his one hit this weekend was a 114-mile single off of a lefty. So it's like he's already a lefty that had struck him out the at-bat before. So it's like he's already kind of shown that, like, hey, he can see a lefty, strike out, and then come back the next at-bat, make an adjustment, barrel up a baseball. I'm not saying it's that simple. Obviously, he's going to face much, much better lefties than the slapdick that he faced from Washington State on Friday. But it's like, I just think it's an interesting call to bench him after that. And I understand you want to get Cam Kosal in there. And like I've said 1,000 times, there are like 12 different scenarios where you can play both guys. They're both in that sophomore class that I'm saying you need to get going. So I feel like benching Nolan Souza after game 1, maybe a little bit of an overreaction. And then, of course, he plays poorly on Saturday, made a little bit more sense. But I still think when you know Washington State is at the end of the line pitching wise, you have Carson Bowles starting in right field, which he played well, good for him, which, by the way, I didn't list him as an option in the outfield. Technically, he is one. Ultimately, like when we get to SEC play, I have a hard time really envisioning that path. But it's like, I don't know. I feel like that would have maybe been a good time to have Nolan Souza in the lineup, especially when they took the lefty out. Maybe get him a confidence boost against a guy throwing 85. That maybe would have been the way I would have gone about it, but I'm obviously not being paid to make these decisions. I'm not a Hall of Fame coach. I'm not on this coaching staff, but I just do think it's interesting because it lines up with what we've seen the last few years, which is a little bit of overreactions. When a guy struggles, they yank him out of the lineup. And then that guy comes back and he's all of a sudden he's pressing and now he's a little bit worried and he's going out of the zone and he's looking over his shoulder. He's got to check the lineup card every day. We've seen this happen a ton. It happened to Braden Webb in 2022. They benched him after the first week of the season when he stunk. And then it took him until like conference play to get back, to break out of that. Because every time he would get a start, it was like, oh crap, but am I going to be starting tomorrow? And, you're getting a little antsy at the plate. We always use that term pressing. it's kind of easy to see why. And by the end of the year, Braden Webb ended up being one of the best hitters on the team. Same with Peyton Stovall. But you took them 6 weeks to get going because you panicked and benched them after they showed a sign of struggle. Same thing happened with Caleb Cali. Caleb Cali ended up hitting the 2023 season over 300 and had 9 home runs. But you spent 6 weeks of the season, hell, damn near 2 months. I remember being in Baton Rouge in mid-March watching the team play, and Caleb Cali was not starting. They were starting Harold Cole at third base. You wasted 6 weeks of the season not starting a guy who had one of the biggest upsides on your team and wound up being basically your best hitter down the stretch because you benched him at the first sign of struggle. Thankfully, they kind of learned their lesson with Kuhio Aloy last year and didn't bench him at the first sign of struggle. But he was another guy that started really slow and just kind of had to play his way through it. And I feel like last year you could have maybe seen that where it's like, okay, we didn't bench Kuhio Aloy. He ends up producing pretty highly for us in conference play. He was one of the, I think he led the team in RBI, led the team in home runs, all that. I think that should have maybe shown them what can happen if you just ride with one of your top guys. Because again, all these guys are kind of boom or bust to an extent. If you benched Kuhio Aloy every time he had a 3 strikeout game, you would be benching Kuhio Aloy a lot. You would be benching Jace Borfin a lot. You would be benching Jared Wagner a lot. You would be benching a lot of these guys a lot. Jace Borfin's another guy that they buried on the bench because he struggled early in the season. And then they never really end up getting the full amount out of him until the next year. And so when you have a lineup that has struggled immensely the last 3 years and drastically underachieved, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on Arkansas to succeed in 2025 offensively. So there's already a ton of pressure on the team overall. You choked in the postseason. That can get guys a little bit antsy. But now when you start jerking guys around the lineup every day, and look, I understand it's opening weekend. You want to play everybody. You've got a lot of mouths to feed. But I just don't know if doing the overreactionary, hey, he strikes out 3 times, all right, get him out of there. Now, the next time you put him in, it's going to be a little bit shaky. And so, look, it's probably going to take them, if I had to guess, it's probably going to take them about 6 weeks before they really get Nolan Souza rolling if they're going to continue to play him sparingly like this and yank him every time he has a bad game. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about this. And I think we've kind of seen that in the last few years because you look at a Razorback lineup that has some pretty good players throughout, but they take so long to finally settle on the guys that they really think are going to be the everyday 9 that you end up not getting the best version of the offense. And so if I'm a Razorback fan, which I am, that concerns me a good bit that we're kind of already trending toward that where you're going to have a different guy in the lineup every day. And ultimately, like, you got to let these guys all go out there and have a chance to earn the spot. But if it were me, I would be making sure that my biggest upside bats had every chance to get hot. Because a lot of these guys, ultimately, like I said, they're boom or bust at the plate. They're all going to kind of go through their slumps here and there, but they're also going to have like crazy hot streaks. You don't get the hot streaks if you bench the guy every time he goes cold. And especially, look, we're talking about, it'd be one thing if Nolan Souza were like 2 for 32 with 19 strikeouts. We're talking about 1 for 7. We're talking about 1 for 7. So let's maybe like pump the brakes because I know there's a lot of fans who frankly agree with DVH. Is like, yeah, you should bench Nolan Souza. Send him a message. And maybe that's what'll give him the kick in the rear, and he'll have a much better approach this next weekend. But I feel like I've seen this story play out a few times, and I've seen Arkansas fans look stupid a few times, overreacting to a very small sample size opening weekend. And I've seen this coaching staff really struggle to land on 9 guys that they really feel confident about and just let them roll, which I feel like ultimately is the best way to get the most out of your lineup. Not that you just play the same guys every single day, no matter what. I'm not saying that, but there's a lot of room in between never substituting and changing the entire lineup every single game. I just don't know how you're ever going to find that real offensive rhythm, which we all agree has been missing from this lineup for 3 years if you're going to continue to jerk all these guys around. Look at A&M, look at LSU, look at Tennessee. They don't do that shit. They just don't. And look, I know that's going to, sound a little weird to say, but it's like, I don't know, man. At some point, you just got to look at what other teams are doing way better than you and maybe adapt a little bit to that. And look, I'm being a little dramatic here, getting a little long-winded, but I just that's my big, if I have a concern from opening weekend, it's that I kind of see the writing on the wall of how this is going to play out. And so again, I just did a lineup breakdown. If you're expecting there to be any lineup clarity, it seems like we may be waiting a few more weeks than we maybe wanted to. So I'm sorry to end the episode on such a hostile note, but I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Baumbastic Podcast. I'm actually way more optimistic about this team and its overall outlook than I sounded over those last 10 minutes, but it's been really frustrating to kind of make sense of some of this that's been going on and just some of the reactions to, because honestly, the fans bum me out a good bit whenever, Kuhio Aloy strikes out and I'm reading all these crazy comments. Oh, Vahiva sucks. He hasn't made any progress. Same approach as last year. Same. It's like nobody can just like let the games play out, let the season play out, and we can kind of assess where we're at along the way. It always has to be a definitive, this guy sucks, this guy's good. No, actually, this guy's bad. No, actually, this guy's good, and this guy sucks. And we always have to jump to these big conclusions. I really, if I could offer anybody advice, I would just say, try to see every angle of this, because that's what I'm trying to do on this podcast. And I really want all of us to do that. Like, ultimately, like, this coaching staff is going to do what they're going to do. And, I'll pull it up again. Like, there's a lot of really talented players on this list, way more than 9 talented players on this list. There's a bunch of different ways you can go about it. We might not all love it. We might not all agree with it, but like, there's a case to be made at pretty much every spot for all of these guys that I have listed. And so I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about it, or I'm going to try not to. And I would encourage you guys to do the same. But let's just, we'll see how this whole thing plays out. We'll continue to assess it along the way. I did the lineup breakdown today. Tomorrow, I'm going to do the Circle of Trust breakdown. We're going to get an update on the Circle of Trust and see who all's still in, who all's out, who all's whatever. But I appreciate you guys for being here always. Appreciate you guys and your love for Arkansas baseball. Never let that go. Look forward to seeing some of you guys in Arlington. It's been another brilliant edition of the Baumbastic Podcast. Have a great